What's going on, everyone? This is my guide for Lady Vashj, the final boss of the Serpent Shrine Cavern. Lady Vashj is definitely a step up in complexity and difficulty compared to any of the previous bosses in Tier 4 or SSC. She will require a little bit of progression to lock in a kill. For raid composition, you're going to want to bring along 2 tanks, 6 healers, and a mix of DPS. Ideally, you want a shaman to come along prepared to kite striders, but this can also be done by a warlock without too much issue. Having some melee here doesn't hurt either to keep a good damage split between adds during Phase 2. Let's jump into it, starting with Phase 1. Phase 1 is basically tank and spank. Your tanks are going to want to tank the boss central while the raid spreads out 360 degrees around Lady Vashj. You're going to need to have a shaman in the tanks group keeping down grounding totem in order to negate shock blast, which will stun the tank if not grounded. Occasionally grounding will absorb a static charge, forcing the tank to sit the stun. The boss will also entangle players in melee range and run out of melee range of the tank. When this happens, a paladin should be called to cast Blessing of Freedom on the affected tank. Vashj will cast a pretty painful multi-shot while there is no one in melee range, so getting this cleared with freedom quickly is very important. The last ability that Vashj will use during Phase 1 is Static Charge, which will be applied to players at random. Players should spread 8 yards from affected players to minimize AoE damage taken from this. Once Vashj reaches 70% health, she will move to the middle of the platform and activate the 4 pylons on her platform. This is the beginning of Phase 2. During this phase, Vashj is immune to damage and no longer needs to be tanked. The only ability she will use is Forked Lightning, which will hit all players in a frontal cone with infinite range. Damage from this is minimized by keeping the raid spread fairly evenly 360 degrees around Vashj. In order to get into Phase 3, all 4 pylons need to be deactivated. This is done by killing the tainted elementals, which spawn every 50 seconds from the start of Phase 2 at the bottom of the stairs in a random location. They won't move, but they will spit poison at random players. When killed, these will drop an item called a Tainted Core. The Tainted Core needs to be looted and passed between players up to the pylon. While you are holding a Tainted Core, you are unable to move, so it must be passed between player to player using this macro. Once the core has been passed to a player close enough to interact with the pylon, they will be able to do so disabling the pylon. This needs to be done once for each pylon. I have a recording here demonstrating passing the core between players on the live servers. We're going to assign a team whose job it will be to deal with this mechanic. As can be seen here, I've split the area into 3 separate sections: blue, red, and green. For each of these sections, 2 ranged DPS are going to be assigned, and they want to position themselves similar to where the icons are placed in this image. These players will need to watch their boss mod timers for when a tainted elemental is going to spawn, and be ready to call its location, ping its location, and kill it quickly if it spawns in their area. You have 15 seconds from when it spawns to kill it before it despawns. They also have 7k HP, so you must be on the ball here. Once the elemental is dead, the player runs down, loots the tainted core, ready to pass it to a player from the core passing team. Also, during the downtime between tainted elemental spawns, these ranged DPS should focus on killing enchanted elementals and getting DPS on the elite adds. It cannot be stressed enough how important communicating and pinging the location of the elemental is so that the passing group can get into position quickly. Now onto the core passing group. You'll want to assign 4 players whose job it will be to position in a chain and quickly pass the core between them to one of the pylons. Here are a couple of images demonstrating how this should work. Here, Core Thrower 1 has killed and looted the core. They then pass it up to number 2, number 2 will pass it to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 should be in a position close enough to click the pylon. Once it's clicked, that's 1 pylon down. The Tainted Elemental will not always spawn close to an active pylon, like in this demonstration where the chain will need to be an extra player longer. The players assigned to this role will need to be able to communicate well, and the positions of each player in the chain can be prepared between themselves before the fight. This team can be made up of any player who doesn't already have another assignment. I would suggest using a healer, 2 ranged DPS, and a melee, with the melee being the player assigned to be the player next to the pylon. Also note that although it does have a decent range, you must be in line of sight to pass the core between players. The next unique role in Phase 2 is the player assigned to kite the Strider, which will ideally be a shaman using Frost Shock. This person will pick up the Strider when it spawns, ideally getting misdirected when possible, and they will kite it in a circle around the platform. The Strider constantly pulses an AoE fear around itself, so they must keep their distance and try to prevent it from walking through the center. It will also almost certainly one-shot you if meleeed. It also deals some damage from its Mind Blast attack, but this is simply healed. Once again, the player is not assigned to any roles, but want to spread out 360 degrees around Vashj, taking care not to clump together to avoid the damage from Forked Lightning. Now with all that out of the way, let's talk about how Phase 2 works and how it should play out. First up, constantly all the way through Phase 2, there will be a constant stream of enchanted elementals which will slowly move towards Vashj. If they reach her, she will gain a stacking 5% damage buff. These elementals have very little health and should never reach Vashj. The ranged DPS assigned to killing the tainted elementals can almost deal with these alone, but any elementals that may make their way through towards the central circle need to be killed immediately. Every 45 seconds in Phase 2, a Korfang Elite ad will spawn. This is a melee Naga which a tank will pick up and bring to the center to be DPS down. These elites have 279,000 HP and do have a frontal cleave, so be aware of where it's facing. The first Naga that spawns should get absolutely pumped by all the DPS to get a good solid head start on the ads. Every 60 seconds in Phase 2, starting from the beginning of Phase 2, a Korfang Strider ad will spawn. This ad has 419,000 health and needs to be picked up by the assigned player to kite around the platform as discussed earlier. As soon as threat is established, range should immediately swap to the Strider. Melee cannot touch the Strider due to the constant pulsing fear. Players can help out the Strider kiter by using stuns on it, and any tailors can use netherweave nets to slow it down. In the likely event that your kiter is having trouble holding threat, people need to be aware that if they are going to pull threat, they need to be in a position where the Strider is not going to be pulled through the center or on top of unsuspecting players. This isn't a huge issue, as long as the person pulling threat is aware that they will now temporarily be kiting the Strider, and should hold DPS temporarily to allow the designated kiter to regain aggro. Finally, every 50 seconds after the start of Phase 2, a tainted elemental will spawn somewhere at the bottom of the stairs around the room. As discussed earlier, the nearest assigned DPS will call and ping its location so that the core passing group can move into position. Do not sleep on the tainted elemental. You absolutely do not want these despawning, as each missed elemental adds at least another 50 seconds to Phase 2 and means extra ads to kill. If you're late to a tainted elemental, it is 100% worth blowing a cooldown to ensure that it dies. In order to transition into Phase 3 cleanly, you need to aim to never have two of the same type of ad up at a time. So this means you have roughly 45 seconds to kill each Naga and 60 seconds to kill each Strider. Getting this balance of DPS between the ads will be the majority of progression on this fight. You absolutely do not want to go into Phase 3 with a fresh Strider, so you can hold activating the final pylon if this happens, so you can get some damage into the remaining Strider and or Naga. This can also be a good time to blow Bloodlusts and other cooldowns to catch up. Once all four of the pylons have been deactivated, Vashj will enter Phase 3 and a 4-minute enrage timer will begin. In Phase 3, Vashj has all of the same abilities she had in Phase 1. Tanks will need to have grounding totems strapped for them and be ready to call for Blessing of Freedoms if they are entangled. Players need to keep their 8-yard spread to avoid the static charge AoE. In addition to all of the Phase 1 mechanics, in Phase 3, Vashj has 2 extra mechanics. The first is Vashj will randomly mind control up to 3 players throughout the phase. These MCs cannot be CC'd, but they do appear to respect threat, so it can be taunted off of players and threat drops will cause them to stop attacking you. Be aware that if healers are MC'd, they will attempt to heal the boss, and HOTS will need to be purged. The second additional mechanic is Sporebat ads that will fly around above the platform, spitting down small poison patches that players will need to avoid. I found during testing on the PTR that it was really not worth killing the Sporebats, and it was easier to just avoid the poison, so that is what I recommend you try first. At this point, just DPS her down before she enrages and collect your tier 5 helmets. Congratulations, you just cleared SSC. And well, this concludes my guide for Lady Vashj. If you found this guide helpful, be sure to drop a like, and if you want to see more content in the future, please subscribe. Cheers.